The steps are worn smooth. Centuries of feet have done that. Pilgrims from all over France, from all over Europe, from places you'd have to look up on a map. They climb 45 minutes up the mountain through the oak and pine forest of Provence, and they arrive at a cave. You are standing inside it now. The rock is cold, limestone, pale gray, slick with moisture. The air is heavy with incense from the Dominican chapel carved into the cliff face. Candles throw shadows against the back wall. The silence here is the kind that costs something to break. A sign tells you that Mary Magdalene came here after the crucifixion, after the resurrection, after everything. She lived in this cave for 30 years. She ate nothing. Celestial music nourished her instead of food. 7 times a day at the canonical hours, angels carried her bodily from the cave floor to the summit of the cliff above, where she heard the music of heaven. She preached to the people of Provence. She converted the region. And at the end, a bishop named Maximine was transported miraculously to her side to administer last rites. You stand in the dark and feel the weight of the place. Something like holiness, something like doubt. And then a question arrives. When was this story first written down? My name is Nathan. Some of you know me by now. 12 years teaching history at a Catholic school in Evansville, Indiana. Resigned in my early 40s when the questions I was asking became professionally inconvenient. Now I do this. I want to talk about what actually happened to Mary Magdalene after the cross. Not the story the institution gave you. Not the cave and the angels and 30 years of celestial music. What the historical record shows, and what the historical record hides. Because here is the thing most people don't realize. Mary Magdalene is named in all 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Every single one. She's at the crucifixion in every Gospel that records it. She's at the burial in Matthew and Mark. She's at the empty tomb in all 4 Gospels. In John, she is the first person the risen Christ speaks to. Every major moment, the theological cornerstone of the entire faith, she's in all of them. And then the book of Acts opens. Acts is the story of what happened next. The early community forming. Pentecost. The movement taking shape. The women who followed Jesus are mentioned once in Acts chapter 1 verse 14. They are described as the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary Magdalene is not named, not in Acts, not in Paul's letter to the Romans, not in either letter to the Corinthians, not in Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, not in any of the letters of Peter, John, or James. The book of Acts does not say. And then Mary Magdalene went on to... She simply vanishes from the official record. I had taught Christian history for over a decade before I saw that clearly. But it wasn't the silence in Acts that stopped me. It was a text I had known by heart since my first year in the classroom. October, not Easter. I was preparing a unit on Paul's letters. Not a theology lesson, a historical chronology. I needed to establish which documents were written first, in what sequence, so the students could understand the tradition they were working with. For the first time in my career, I was reading 1 Corinthians not as a devotional text, but as a document with a date. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 8. Paul writes what scholars have identified as a pre-Pauline creed, not something Paul composed. A formula already circulating in early Christian communities, a statement of faith already in use when Paul wrote, "This is the oldest written account of the resurrection we have." Not the Gospels, not Mark, not the empty tomb narrative. Paul writing approximately 55 CE, 20 years before any Gospel was put to paper, quoting a formula that was already established. The creed reads, "He appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then to more than 500 brothers at one time, then to James, then to all the apostles. And last of all, he appeared to me as well." Cephas, the 12, 500 brothers, James, Paul. I was marking dates at my kitchen table. I was tracing the chronology and I counted the names: Peter, the 12, 500, James, Paul. Then I went back to my 4 Gospels. Matthew, chapter 28. Mary Magdalene is first at the empty tomb, and the risen Christ appears to her first. Mark, chapter 16. Mary Magdalene is the first named witness. Luke, chapter 24. The women, including Mary Magdalene, are first to find the tomb empty and report to the disciples. John chapter 20. Mary Magdalene is alone at the tomb. The risen Christ appears to her before anyone else. He speaks to her. He commissions her to carry the news. All four Gospels, written after Paul's letter, say the same thing. She was first. And the oldest written account of the resurrection, the pre-Pauline creed that billions of Christians have carried as theological bedrock, lists Peter, the 12, 500 brothers, James, and Paul. She is not in it. Not a word. I called Father Donovan that evening. He was the school chaplain, decades of theology. I asked, have you ever noticed that Paul doesn't mention Mary Magdalene in the resurrection list? He said, of course not. Paul was writing for a Greco-Roman audience. Women's testimony wasn't admissible as legal evidence. It would have undermined his case. I said, but the Gospels still put her first. He said, the Gospels are theological documents, Nathan. Paul is building an argument. He chose witnesses whose testimony would hold up. I thanked him. I hung up. I did not sleep that night. Not because the answer was wrong, because of how fast it came. Think back to every Easter service you've attended. The pastor reads the resurrection accounts. You've heard Peter's name, Thomas's, maybe Cleopas on the road to Emmaus. In the oldest written account of the resurrection, the creed already standardized within a few years of the crucifixion, the witness list does not include her. Nobody pointed that out to you. Nobody asked you to notice the gap. That's not an oversight. That's how the mechanism works. A silence maintained long enough becomes invisible. You stop noticing what was never offered to you. N.T. Wright taught at Oxford before becoming Bishop of Durham. In his major study of resurrection belief in the ancient world, he is direct about the omission. He writes, like it or not, women were not regarded as credible witnesses in the ancient world. When Christians formalized the resurrection testimony, they quietly omitted the women who were apologetically inconvenient. Yet the Gospels insist on their central role as the first eyewitnesses. Apologetically inconvenient. 2 words doing 20 centuries of work. Bart Ehrman at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has analyzed the pre-Pauline formula Paul quotes. He dates the creed itself to within 3 to 5 years of the crucifixion. Already standardized, already in use, while people who had been there were still alive. In both Roman and Jewish law, a woman's testimony was inadmissible as evidence in formal legal proceedings. Paul was making an argument to people who thought Greek and argued like Romans. He needed witnesses whose names would carry weight. Mary Magdalene had been there. Everyone apparently knew she had been there. The gospel traditions written after Paul's letter still say she was first. But the creed that became the foundation of resurrection theology was built to make a man the first witness. Not because she wasn't there, because she was the wrong kind of there. James Tabor, who teaches religious history at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, has written about what he calls Magdalene Christianity, an early strand of the tradition that placed her at the center of the movement's continuation after the resurrection. He compares the suppression of her tradition to what happened to James, the brother of Jesus, and the Jerusalem community. Entire branches of early Christianity, sidelined as the institution, consolidated around a different set of voices. Not because those voices were wrong, because they were inconvenient. Now here is the part that stayed with me long after the Father Donovan conversation. John, chapter 20, verse 17. Mary Magdalene is weeping in the garden at what she believes is an empty tomb. She turns, sees a man, mistakes him for the gardener. He asks why she's weeping. She says she doesn't know where the body was taken. He says her name. In that moment, she recognizes him. The Greek text records what happens next. Me mou haptu. The Latin Vulgate, Jerome's translation that shaped Western Christianity for over 1,000 years, noli me tangere. Every English translation since. Do not touch me. 2,000 years. The same rendering. Sandra Schneiders is a professor at the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley. She spent her doctoral career studying this specific encounter. The phrase me mou haptu uses the present imperative in its negative form. In Greek grammar, that construction does not mean do not begin to do something. It means stop doing something you are already doing. She was already touching him. When Jesus spoke, she was holding on. The correct translation is not a prohibition before contact. It is a request to release a contact already made. Schneiders also compared this to John chapter 20 verse 27, where Jesus invites Thomas to touch his side. The verb used for Thomas is in the aorist imperative, a different tense indicating an action not yet begun. Thomas has not yet reached out. Jesus says, begin. Do it. With Mary, present imperative, negative. Stop. With Thomas, aorist imperative, positive. Start. Two different verbs. Two completely different grammatical moments. The Latin Vulgate erased the distinction. For 20 centuries, the translation the Church preserved makes it sound as if Mary had not yet reached him, as if there was a prohibition before contact. The Greek says she was the first human being to hold the risen Christ. She was already holding him when he spoke. J.J. Benítez, in his essay El Mensaje Enterrado, drawing from the Caballo de Troya series, describes 19 resurrection appearances total. The Gospels record only 4. Mary Magdalene was present at the first 2, both occurring on the morning of April 9th. The 15 unrecorded appearances were, in his words, incómodas para la dirección que tomaba la iglesia, uncomfortable for the direction the church was taking. His version of the garden scene does not use the gospel phrase. The risen Christ says, "No soy el que has conocido en la carne." I am not the one you have known in the flesh. Not a prohibition, a transformation. The contact is already happening. The holding is real. What he says is, what you are holding is not the same as what you knew. Picture the garden before dawn. The stone is cold, dew on the grass. The darkness is barely beginning to turn. You've watched him die. You stood at the foot of the cross when everyone else had fled. You sat near the burial watching where the stone was rolled, because you were not going to let them put him in the ground without someone who loved him being there. And now it is Sunday morning, and you are back. You are weeping so hard you can barely see. A man is speaking to you. You think he is the gardener. He says your name. And in that moment, before you have formed a single word, your hands reach out. You grab him. You hold on. And the man who was 3 days dead looks at you and says, "Stop. Let go. I am not the one you have known in the flesh." The translation that 2 billion people have read for 20 centuries made it sound as if you never touched him at all. In 1896, a German scholar named Karl Reinhardt purchased a Coptic manuscript at a market in Cairo, Egypt. He catalogued it as Papyrus Berlinensis 8502, the Berlin Codex, and delivered it to the Egyptian Museum. It sat largely unstudied. World War I, World War II, the division of Germany. Decades passed. The first scholarly edition was published in the 1950s. The manuscript had been sitting in a museum drawer for nearly 60 years. When scholars finally read it, they found the only gospel ever written in the name of a woman. The Gospel of Mary. 19 pages, 10 are missing. Pages 1 through 6, gone. The entire beginning. Pages 11 through 14, gone, the middle section. The pages that survived show what remains once the others are removed. The setting is after the resurrection. Jesus has appeared to the disciples and departed. They are frightened and uncertain. Mary Magdalene steadies them. She says, "Do not weep and do not grieve, for his grace will be entirely with you." And Peter asks her something. He says, "Sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than all the other women. Tell us the words of the Savior that you remember, which you know but we do not, which we have never heard." She received teachings the male apostles were not given. She shares what she received, a vision, a revelation about the soul's ascent. Then Andrew says the teachings seem strange. And Peter says, "Did he really speak with a woman privately without our knowledge? Are we to turn around and all listen to her now? Did he prefer her to us?" And Levi defends her. He says, "Peter, you have always been hot-tempered. If the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? Surely he knows her well, that is why he loved her more than us." Karen L. King holds the Hollis Research Professorship in Divinity at Harvard Divinity School. Her book on this text, The Gospel of Mary of Magdala, Jesus and the First Woman Apostle, was published in 2003. Her conclusion, this text presents an alternative vision of early Christianity, One where authority comes from spiritual understanding and direct revelation, not from institutional hierarchy. Esther de Boer, a scholar at the Protestant Theological University in the Netherlands, traced the literary connections between this text and the Gospel of John across two careful books. She investigated whether Mary Magdalene might be the figure John's Gospel calls the beloved disciple, the one whose identity the text never fully names. Both scholars are working in peer-reviewed academic contexts. Both are working from a text that sat in a drawer for 60 years. The pages that survived show her receiving private revelation and being challenged for it by Peter. The pages that are missing are the beginning and the middle of that revelation. Of the 19 pages of the only gospel written in a woman's name, the sections most likely to contain the most significant material are exactly the ones that don't exist. And now here's something I need you to hold alongside all of that. You began this video in a cave, the one in Provence, the Saint Baume, the candles, the incense, the sign about 30 years and the angels and the music of heaven. Let me tell you when that story was first written down. Catherine Ludwig Jansen is a professor of history at the Catholic University of America. Her book, The Making of the Magdalene, was published by Princeton University Press in 2000. She spent years working through medieval sermons, previously unpublished material from the Franciscan and Dominican preaching orders of the 13th through 15th centuries. She traced how those preachers transformed what she calls a shadowy gospel figure into one of the most vivid characters in Christian hagiography. She became, in their telling, the greatest sinner, the prostitute redeemed by love, the woman of vanity made perfect through penance, the contemplative fed by angels instead of food. Not because the Bible said so, because the institution needed her to be that. The Provençal tradition, the cave, the 30 years, the angels, first appears in writing in the Legenda Aurea, the Golden Legend, published around 1260 by Jacobus de Voragine, a Dominican friar who later became Archbishop of Genoa, 1260 CE. The crucifixion was around 30 CE. The tradition first appears in writing 1230 years later. Not one early church father mentions it, not Justin Martyr, not Origen, not Irenaeus, not Jerome. Men who documented early Christian traditions in considerable detail. Men who preserved debates about texts and practices that would otherwise have been lost entirely. Not one of them says, Mary Magdalene sailed to France. Then on December 10th, 1279, Charles II of Anjou, Lieutenant of Provence and soon to become King of Naples, orders excavations beneath the church at Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume. His workers find a marble tomb in the crypt. Inside, dust, a wooden tablet sealed in wax, a parchment. The tablet reads, "Here lies the body of Mary Magdalene." In 1294, Charles II carries the skull to Rome and presents it to Pope Boniface VIII. The Lateran Basilica produces what it claims is her jawbone. It reportedly fits the skull. Charles II then funds the construction of the largest Gothic basilica in Provence over the site. In 1974, the CNRS, France's National Scientific Research Center, conducted an anthropological examination of the relics. Their conclusion, the remains are compatible with a woman of approximately the right period and age. Compatible with, not confirmed as. The man who discovered the bones funded the building that houses them. The tradition that placed her in that cave does not appear in any written text until 12 centuries after her death. The forensic analysis that was supposed to confirm the identification could not. The cave you were standing in at the beginning has no documented history before the 13th century. If they chose a translation that erased the fact that she was already holding the risen Christ. If they built the foundational resurrection creed to exclude her name from the witness list. If the only gospel written in her name sat in a museum drawer for 60 years and 10 of its 19 pages are simply gone. If the story of where she spent the rest of her life doesn't appear in any written record for 1200 years and then surfaces just in time for a king to discover her bones and fund a basilica over them, then what are we actually missing? Not the story of a peripheral figure, the testimony of the only person present at the crucifixion, the burial, and the resurrection. The account of what she received that the male apostles did not receive. The full content of what the risen Christ told only her, in sections of a manuscript that nobody alive has read. This is not the tragic end of Mary Magdalene. This is what they kept doing to her after she died. I have a paperback copy of the Gospel of Mary. It's not a long book. 19 pages in the reconstruction. I've read what survives more times than I can count. There's a moment near the end of what remains. Page 10. Levi has just finished defending her against Peter. He says, "Surely the Savior knows her well." The disciples agree. They go out to preach. The text ends. I turn the page. Page 11 is not there. I've done this more times than I should admit. You know something isn't there, and you still turn the page. Every time. Nothing. Pages 11 through 14. Whatever Mary said after Levi's defense, whatever the full content of the private vision was, whatever Jesus told only her that was important enough to write down and dangerous enough to lose, those 4 pages are gone. Nobody burned them. We don't know that. Maybe they were lost in transit. Pages separated from the binding in the centuries, a manuscript spent passing from hand to hand before Karl Reinhardt found it in Cairo in 1896. Maybe something else. J.J. Benítez says the 15 resurrection appearances the Gospels don't record were left out because they were uncomfortable for the direction the church was taking. Incómodas para la dirección que tomaba la Iglesia. There is a version in which pages 11 through 14 are simply missing because manuscripts decay. And there is a version in which someone, at some point, read those pages and understood that what was written on them could not stay. I don't know which version is true. I just know that whatever was on those pages, whatever she understood that Peter couldn't accept, whatever the pre-Pauline Creed chose not to record, that is the part we will never read. The pre-Pauline Creed? Peter, the 12, 500 brothers, James, Paul, the Gospel of Mary, pages 1 through 6, missing. Pages 11 through 14, missing. The only Gospel written in the name of a woman, and the only sections I have never been able to reach, are exactly the ones that would tell me what she said.